G'day, it's Professor Joseph Drew. There's been a lot of media attention about really large increases to local government rates, local government taxation. In this video, I'll outline the three main reasons why these large rate increases are taking place. Now, please understand, I've got personal experience of this. We just copped a big one in Tamworth. So, reason number one is constrained revenue. Local government's not like state government, federal government. It's definitely not like a business. It's definitely not like your own household budget because our revenue is constrained. So in many states, New South Wales, Victoria, we have rate capping. We can only put up our taxes ordinarily each year by a certain percentage. As I've showed you in other videos, that percentage has been much, much lower than actual inflation hitting councils, which is very different to CPI. Remember that the CPI is the Consumer Price Index. It's about the inflation on household goods. Councils don't buy household goods, they buy more energy intensive stuff, and that's the stuff that's been really hit in the last couple of years. Same with grants. They're the biggest block group of grants are called the financial assistance grants, sometimes abbreviated unfortunately to FAGs. They're indexed to CPI, but as I just said, CPI has very little to do with local government cost pressures. Lots of our fees are regulated. We can only charge a certain fee, even if it costs a lot more than that to provide the goods or service. Now, that's a problem if someone is getting something for their personal use and not paying the full cost of providing for that. Why? Presents a sustainability challenge, but secondly, it means that every ratepayer has to subsidise that good. Now, when you go to the supermarket and buy a chocolate bar, no one subsidises your chocolate bar. So if you're buying, stormwater drainage or something like that, where's the argument about why people should be subsidising that? And of course, in most states, we have mandated discounts, such as pensioner discounts. Nothing against pensioners. I want to be one myself one day. But the whole idea of a pensioner discount ignores the moral foundation of a land-based tax. What we're trying to do is capture some unearned wealth. As soon as you apply mandated discounts to some groups and not other groups, you have an equity issue. You also have to wonder why one group will be getting to keep more of the unearned wealth than another group. You also have some questions raised about whether they are indeed the group being hit hardest. I'm sure they're not doing it good, but consider young people on casual incomes, people in the gig economy, people with mortgages, low mortgage rates at the moment. They're possibly, in many cases, doing it much harder. So those mandated discounts might even be quite misdirected. The second reason, I see it all the time, and it explains things like these councils that end up having to do these massive tax increases, like 70% in Federation, 53% in Cootamundra Gundagai, 80% proposed in North Sydney. I think it was 90-odd% in Tenterfield that was proposed. The big tax increases come about usually because of delays. As soon as your revenue is not meeting your expenditure, if you don't do something about that, every year that gap is going to grow and it's going to compound and becomes a bigger and bigger problem. So put it in terms of your personal budget. Say you're spending 40 grand a year and you're only earning 30 grand a year. Now, if you do something about that straight away and get a second job, things won't be too bad. If you have that gap of 10 grand growing for another 5 or 6 years before you do something, you're going to be in a lot of grief. So usually that's done with kindness in mind. The councillors will typically say, we don't want to hurt our ratepayers, we don't want to put pressure on them during a cost of living crisis. But it's not a kindness if your delays ultimately lead to an 80% tax increase. That's not a kindness. Or is this delaying the inevitable? And at the end of the day, arithmetic is what it is. Doesn't matter how kind we want to be. If there's a gap between expenditure and revenue, the arithmetic will come and bite you. Now, the other issue I have with this is that people are saying it's not a good time for a local government tax increase. Well, it's probably not, but there never is a good time. When was the time when everyone in local government communities were saying, oh, let's have a tax increase, it's a good time? There's never a good time. And what makes people think that the times will get better? I don't think they will. I'm a classically trained economist, and I know all about money supply and government deficits and inflation. And I know all about declining productivity and how that ends. So if you're waiting for a good time, my suggestion to you is that that good time is probably never coming. This might be as good as it gets. Now, before I go on to the third one, which will surprise you and very important, please let me remind you to subscribe, flick this on, and even consider sending me a nice message. Lots of people do. I do this on my own time. It's after hours at present with my own resources, and I'm happy to do it. Sometimes it can take me a long time to prepare for these slides. Please just return the favour and subscribe. Thank you. And the third one is the cost pressures actually facing local government. You think about things like energy. You think about materials like concrete and bitumen. They're the things that have been really rocketing up. Insurance. Imagine the insurance that you're probably hurting from your own insurance bill. I know I am. But imagine the insurance bill that a council has. Imagine the electricity bill a council has for all those street lights and everything else. So CPI is never going to cut it. Now, you might think your particular council is inefficient, lazy, whatever story you have. But if we looked at councils in aggregate, it would be really hard to, particularly audited data, to try to carry on a story that said, oh, they're all inefficient, terrible, rotting the system, whatever. So let's look at it in aggregate. This is New South Wales, but every state will be the same. And look what happened in 2023. Now, mostly because of state government and federal government policies related to COVID. This is where the spikes started to occur. And look at 2023, typical council costs year-on-year increase 14%. Now, it's gone down a little bit in 2024 to around the 8% mark, typical increase year-on-year costs. But I'm sure you all realise that's much, much higher than the rate caps, much, much higher than CPI, which means it's much, much more higher than the increase to the grants. And something's got to give. Now, some of you might be thinking it has something to do with staff costs. They have been rising in line with EBAs, and everyone's wages do go up. That's what happens, particularly in a high inflation environment, but not ridiculously so. Actually, most of the increase in costs have been for materials and contracts. So when the council has to engage someone to perform services, often for regulatory reasons. And the other really big one has been depreciation, as I'll show you quickly on the next slide. As you can see, going back to the last few years, the best line to look at here, by the way, is the median, or you can look at the mean, which is average. This has been growing far in excess of inflation for as far back as you can look, 6 or 7 years there. And some councils have been really getting clobbered, particularly in some states where you've got auditor generals. The auditing has been centralised. We've turned it from a competitive market into a monopoly. Costs have doubled or tripled in some cases. And there's been some strange interpretations of the Australian accounting standards, which are linked to the International Financial Reporting System that we signed up to. So that's a bit of a problem. Now, on the side here, I've got a shopping list, a to-do list that some of our state governments could do. They like to blame councils. They like to tell them to live within their means. And I think most of them are trying to do some. Do strange things from time to time and they get called out on it, fair enough. But most of them are just trying to stick bitumen on your road and keep your water flowing and pick up your rubbish. Here's some things the state governments can do in every state if they're really concerned about this. Get rid of inefficient audit monopolies. Get rid of regulated fees. Abide by the intent of the Australian accounting standards. Allocate grant monies according to the intent of the federal legislation. Stop shifting costs. Stop adding new costs, such as ARICS and the training courses that you have to do all the time. Stop passing your financial problems down to local government. Stop having inquiries into local government financial sustainability without having actual proper experts and evidence presented to the inquiry. Compensate the councils and the communities for the disastrous amalgamations. Engage sincerely and constructively with the sector and also bona fide experts, not the self-professed pretend experts, the actual bona fide experts that can prove it. Don't be tempted to score political points. It's quite easy to go council bashing. We're seeing lots of it on the media at present. All those media releases come from offices of local governments and local government ministers and opposition politicians. Try to resist the temptation. Look at the real story, like in these videos, and consider it reasonably and say, well, yes, they do have constrained revenue. Cost is going up more than that. Of course, there's going to be a problem. And I think as a nation, we need to acknowledge that we have a real problem. The federal and state governments could spend some real money doing proper, real research that will get us to real solutions based on fact and robust empirical work. So there's a great big to-do list. I'm sure there's lots more there, but there's lots of things that we can do straight away if the state government is actually concerned about these things. Look, thank you so much for your time. Please spread this around. It's important everyone gets the message. If you want to use it on your council website, that's fine. I don't have any angle to grind apart from the angle of truth. That's all I'm interested in. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.